The color of magic. Fire roared through the bifurcated city of Ankh-Morpork. When it licked the wizard's quarter, it burned blue and green, and was even laced with strange sparks of the eighth color, octarine, where its outriders found their way into the vats and oil stores all along Merchant Street. It progressed in a series of blazing fountains and explosions. In the streets of the perfume blenders, it burned with a sweetness. Where it touched bundles of rare and dry herbs in the storerooms of the drug masters, it made men mad and talk to God. By now, the whole of downtown Morpork was alight, and the richer and worthier citizens of Ankh on the far bank were bravely responding to the situation by feverishly demolishing the bridges. But already the ships in the Morpork docks, laden with grain, cotton, and timber, and coated with tar, were blazing merrily, and their moorings burnt to ashes, were breasting the river Ankh on the ebb tide, igniting riverside palaces and bowers as they drifted like drowning fireflies towards the sea. In any case, sparks were riding the breeze and touching down far across the river in hidden gardens and remote rickyards. The smoke from the merry burning rose miles high in a wind-sculpted black column that could be seen across the whole of the Discworld. It was certainly impressive from the cool, dark hilltop a few leagues away, where two figures were watching with considerable interest. The taller of the pair was chewing on chicken leg, leaning on a sword that was only marginally shorter than the average man. If it wasn't for the air of wary intelligence about him, it might have been supposed that he was a barbarian from the Hubland wastes. His partner was much shorter, and wrapped from head to toe in a brown cloak. Later, when he has occasion to move, it will be seen that he moves lightly, cat-like. The two had barely exchanged a word in the last 20 minutes, except for a short and inconclusive argument as to whether a particularly powerful explosion had been the oil bond store or the workshop of Caribal the Enchanter. Money hinged on the fact. Now the big man finished gnawing at the bone and tossed it into the grass, smiling ruefully. "There go all those little alleyways," he said. "I liked them." "Oh, the treasure houses," said the small man. He added thoughtfully, "Do gems burn, I wonder? 'Tis said they're kin to coal." "All the gold melting and running down the gutters," said the big one, ignoring him, "and all the wine boiling in the barrels." "There were rats," said his brown companion. "Rats, I'll grant you. It was no place to be in high summer." "That too. One can't help feeling, though, a momentary..." He trailed off, then brightened. "The old Fridor at the Crimson Leech ate silver pieces," he added. The little man nodded. They were silent for a while as a whole new series of explosions carved a red line across a hitherto dark section of the greatest city in the world. Then the big man stirred. "Weasel?" "Yes." "I wonder who started it." The small swordsman, known as the Weasel, said nothing. He was watching the road in the ruddy light. Few had come that way since the Deosil Gate had been one of the first to collapse in a shower of white-hot embers. But two were coming up it now. The Weasel's eyes, always at their sharpest in gloom and half-light, made out the shapes of two mounted men, and some sort of low beast behind them. Doubtless a rich merchant escaping with as much treasure as he could lay frantic hands on. The weasel said as much to his companion, who sighed. The status of footpad ill suits us, said the barbarian. But, as you say, times are hard, and there are no soft beds tonight. He shifted his grip on his sword, and as the leading rider drew near, stepped out onto the road with a hand held up, and his face set in a grin nicely calculated to reassure yet threaten. Pardon, sir. The, ri- the rider reined in his horse and drew back his hood. The big man looked into a face blotched with superficial burns and punctuated by tufts of singed beard. Even the eyebrows had gone. Bugger off, said the face. You're Brob the Hublander, aren't you? Footnote. The shape and cosmology of the disk system are perhaps worthy of note at this point. There are, of course, two major directions on the disk, hubward and rimward. But since the disk itself revolves at the rate of once every 800 days in order to distribute the weight fairly upon its supportive pachyderms, according to Reforgel of Kroll, there are also two lesser directions, which are turnwise and widdershins. Since the disk's tiny orbiting sunlet maintains a fixed orbit, while the majestic disk turns slowly beneath it, it will be readily deduced that a disk year consists of not 4, but 8 seasons. The summers are those times when the sun rises or sets at the nearest point on the rim. The winters, those occasions when it rises or sets in a point around 90 degrees along the circumference. Then, thus, in the lands around the Circle C, the year begins on Hogswatch night, progresses through a spring prime to its first midsummer, Small God's Eve, which is followed by autumn prime, and straddling the half-year point of Crueltide, winter secundus, also known as the spindle winter, since at this time the sun rises in the direction of spin. Then comes secundus spring with summer, too, on its heels, the three-quarter mark of the year being the night of All's Fallow, the one night of the year, according to legend, when witches and warlords stay in bed. Then drifting leaves and frosty nights drag on towards backspindle winter, and a new Hogswatch night nestling like a frozen jewel at its heart. Since the hub is never closely warmed by the weak sun, the lands there are locked in permafrost. The rim, on the other hand, is a region of sunny islands and balmy days. There are, of course, 8 days in a disk week, and 8 colors in its light spectrum. 8 is a number of some considerable occult significance on the disk, and must never, ever be spoken by a wizard. Precisely why all the above should be so is not clear, but goes some way to explain why, on the disk, the gods are not so much worshipped as blamed. And now we return to our story. Brovd became aware that he had fumbled the initiative. Just go away, will you? Said the rider. I haven't got time for you. Do you understand? He looked around and added, That goes for your shadow-loving fleabag partner, too, wherever he's hiding. The weasel stepped up to the horse and peered at the disheveled figure. Why, it's Rincewind the wizard, isn't it? He said in tones of delight, meanwhile filing the wizard's description of him in his memory for leisurely vengeance. I thought I recognized the voice. Brob spat and sheathed his sword. It was seldom worth tangling with wizards. They so rarely had any treasure worth speaking of. He talks pretty big for a gutter wizard, he muttered. You don't understand at all, said the wizard wearily. I'm so scared of you, my spine is turned to jelly. It's just that I'm suffering from an overdose of terror right now. I mean, when I've got over that, then I'll have time to be decently frightened of you. The weasel pointed towards the burning city. You've been through that? He asked. The wizard rubbed a red raw hand across his eyes. I was there when it started. See him? Back there? He pointed back down the road to where his traveling companion was still approaching, having adopted a method of riding that involved falling out of the saddle every few seconds. Well, said Weasel. He started it, said Rincewind simply. Brovd and Weasel looked at the figure now hopping across the road with one foot in a stirrup. Fire Razor, is he? Said Brovd at last. No, said Rincewind, not precisely. Let's just say that if complete and utter chaos was lightning, then he'll be the sort to stand on a hilltop in a thunderstorm wearing wet copper and shouting, "All gods are bastards!" You got any food? There's some chicken, said Weasel, in exchange for a story. What's his name? Said Brovd, who tended to lag behind in conversations. Two Flower. Two Flower, said Brovd. What a funny name. You, said Rincewind, dismounting, do not know the half of it. Chicken, you say? Deviled, said Weasel. The wizard groaned. That reminds me, added the weasel, snapping his fingers. There was a really big explosion about, half an hour ago. That was the oil bond store going up, said Rincewind, wincing at the memory of the burning rain. Weasel turned and grinned expectantly at his companion, who grated and handed over a coin from his pouch. Then there was a scream from the roadway, cut off abruptly. Rincewind did not look up from his chicken. One of the things he can't do. He can't ride a horse, he said. Then he stiffened as if sandbagged by a sudden recollection, gave a small yelp of terror, and dashed into the gloom. When he returned, the being called Two Flower was hanging limply over his shoulder. It was small and skinny, and dressed very oddly in a pair of knee-length breeches and a shirt in such a violent and vivid conflict of colors that Weasel's fastidious eye was offended even in the faff-light. No bones broken, by the feel of things, said Rincewind. He was breathing heavily. Brovd winked at the weasel, and went to investigate the shape that they assumed was a pack animal. You'd be wise to forget it, said the wizard without looking up from his examination of the unconscious Two Flower. Believe me, a power protects it. A spell, said Weasel, squatting down. No, but magic of a kind, I think. Not the usual sort. I mean, it can turn gold into copper, while at the same time it is still gold. It makes rich men rich by destroying their possessions. It allows the weak to walk fearlessly among thieves. It passes through the strongest doors to reach the most protected treasuries. Even now it has me enslaved. so that I must follow this madman willy-nilly and protect him from harm. It's stronger than you, Brovd. It is, I think, more cunning even than you, Weasel. What is it called, then, this mighty magic? Rincewind shrugged. In our tongue, it is called reflected sound as of underground spirits. Is there any wine? You must know that I am not without artifice where magic is concerned, said Weasel. Only last year did I, assisted by my friend there, part the notoriously powerful archmaze of Imitary from his staff, his belt of moon jewels, and his life, in that approximate order. I do not fear this reflected sound of underground spirits of which you speak. However, he added, you engage my interest. Perhaps you would care to tell me more. Brovd looked at the shape on the road. It was closer now and clearer in the pre-dawn light. It looked for all the world like a box on legs, he said. I'll tell you about it, said Rincewind. If there's any wine, that is. Down in the valley there was a roar and someone more thoughtful than the rest had ordered to be shut the big river gates that were at the point where the Ankh flowed out of the Twin City. Denied its usual egress, the river had burst its banks and was pouring down the fire-ravaged streets. Soon the continent of flame became a series of islands, each one growing smaller as the dark tide rose. And up from the city of fumes and smoke rose a broiling cloud of steam, covering the stars. Weasel thought that it looked like some dark fungus or mushroom.